Walk into a furniture store this weekend and price a solid wood dining table. $800, $900 if the legs are turned pretty. Most folks look at that number and figure a real table is out of reach unless they've got deep pockets or a shop full of machines. But I'm going to show you how to build one out of solid wood at your own pace for under $100, and it'll outlast that store-bought one by 50 years. Stay with me because the whole thing comes down to a few honest joints, and a good joint is money in the bank. We're building a simple farmhouse table, a solid top on 4 legs, the kind that seats 6 around a Sunday dinner. And you don't need much to do it. A saw, a few clamps, a drill, a sharp chisel, and sandpaper. That's the kit. So let's start where the table starts, at the lumber rack. Here's what lands you under $100. Construction lumber, the same softwood framing stock they build houses with, sitting in the racks at any lumber yard. For the top, you want 2x8s or 2x10s, pine, fir, or spruce, whatever your yard carries. For the legs, one 4x4. And for the aprons, those are the rails that run underneath and tie the legs together, a couple of 2x4s. That's the whole list. Let me give you real numbers because I've no use for vague talk. A 2x8, 8 feet long, runs you somewhere around $8 to $12 right now. A 4x4, 8 feet, 10 to 15. Figure your top first. A 2x8 is about 7¼ inches wide, so 4 or 5 of them side by side gives you a top around 3 foot across, which is right for a farmhouse table. You can use 2x10s instead and get your width in fewer boards, which means fewer seams to glue, but a wider board cups harder, so it's a trade. I lean on the 2x8s. More seams, but a flatter top and easier handling. Buy 1 extra board past what you need too, because you're going to cull a few, and I'll show you why in a minute. So, 5 boards for the top, 1 4x4 cut into 4 legs, a 2x4 or 2 for the aprons, a bottle of wood glue, and a bit of oil for the finish. Add it up and you're standing at $60 to $90. For a solid wood table, not veneer over sawdust, solid wood clean through. Now here's the first honest word, and I won't dress it up. Under $100 means softwood, pine or fir. It does not mean walnut, and it does not mean oak. Those are fine woods, but they'll cost you $300 or $400 in boards alone, and this isn't that table. Pine is soft. A dropped cast iron pan will leave its mark. But a pine table, built right, lasts generations, and every ding it earns just becomes part of its face. If you want to step up and still stay under budget, poplar's your wood, technically a hardwood, maybe a couple dollars more. A board takes paint beautifully and cuts like butter. But plain construction pine will build you a table your grandchildren eat off of, or use reclaimed if you've got it lying around. One more thing while you're at the rack. Glance at the end of each board and find the center of the tree, the pith, that little bullseye of soft rings. A board with the pith running right through it will twist and check on you as it dries. Leave those. And pass on any board with a big loose knot sitting near an edge where you'll want clean wood. The secret to a flat table isn't in the shop. It's in the store, standing at the rack, picking your boards, and this is where most folks lose the table before they've cut a single thing. Framing lumber is stacked wet and stacked careless, and half of it is junk. Your job is to find the good half. Pick up each board and sight down it, like you're aiming down a barrel, one eye closed, looking straight along the length. You're hunting 4 faults. Cup, where the board curls across its width like a shallow trough. Bow, where it bends along its length. Twist, where the 2 ends wind opposite ways. That's the worst of them and the hardest to fix. And wane, where an edge is missing or still wearing a strip of bark. Any board that shows you those, set it back. Be picky. You might go through 20 boards to find your 5, and the fellow stacking the pile will think you're difficult. Let him. While you're reading those ends, Read the grain too. If the growth rings run more or less straight up and down across the end, that's quarter sawn, and it's the most stable wood there is. It barely moves. If the rings lie flat, in long arcs, that's flat sawn, and that's most of what you'll find. Flat sawn is fine, it just moves a little more with the seasons. You won't always get the choice, so take the straightest boards with the tightest, flattest grain in the pile and move on. Then, and this is the step nobody wants to hear you carry that lumber home and let it sit, inside. In the room the table will live in or near it for a week or two before you cut anything. Stack it with thin sticks laid between the boards so air moves on every side. Here's why, and this is the honesty I promised you. Key line dried construction lumber isn't dry the way furniture wood is dry. Shop dry hardwood sits down around 7 or 8% moisture. That framing pine off the rack comes wetter often up around 10 or 12%, more if it's been out in the weather, and wet wood shrinks as it dries. If you build the day you buy it, that top is going to move on. You shrink, cup, open a gap at a glue line over the first month in a heated house. Let it acclimate. Give it a week or two to come to terms with your home. That patience costs you nothing but time, and it's the whole difference between a table that stays flat and one that fights you every winter. Don't skip it. Now we build the top, and this part looks like magic, but it isn't. You've got your 5 boards, and they came from the mill with the edges rounded over that soft bullnose on every stick of framing lumber. Rounded edges won't glue. Press 2 of them together and you've left a hollow down the seam. So the first thing is to rip that round over clean off both long edges of every board on the table saw or with a straight, careful saw cut, so you're left with square, flat edges that meet a neighbor dead flat. Clamp your work, don't hold it, and keep your fingers well back from the blade. A saw doesn't forgive. With the edges square, you joint them true, that just means dead straight, so there's no gap when 2 boards meet. A hand plane does it, or a clean rip on a good saw. Lay 2 boards edge to edge and hold the seam up to the light. If no light sneaks through, you're ready to glue. Before you do, lay all your boards out and look at those end rings one more time. You want to alternate them. One board with its rings arching up, the next arching down, back and forth across the top. That way, if the wood wants to cup as it seasons, each board pulls against its neighbor instead of the whole top curling one way. They fight each other to a draw, and the top stays flatter. Old trick, good one. Then you glue. Run a bead of ordinary yellow wood glue down each mating edge, spread it thin to cover the whole face, and clamp the boards edge to edge into one wide panel. Set a clamp about every 10 or 12 inches and alternate them above and below the panel so the pressure pulls even and doesn't bow the top. A few dowels or biscuits dropped in the seam will help you line the boards up flush so there's less sanding after, but understand me, the dowels aren't holding your top together. The glue joint is. Done right, a glued edge joint is stronger than the wood around it. The board will crack somewhere else before that seam ever lets go. That's the whole secret of a solid top. And here's where you use cauls, stout straight bars clamped across the panel top and bottom to hold the whole thing dead flat while the glue sets. Because if you only clamp from the sides, a panel will buckle up in the middle like a road in the July heat. When the squeeze out along the seams turns rubbery, 20 minutes on or so, pare it off with a putty knife or an old chisel. Get it now. Let it harden under your finish, and it shows up later as a pale streak that won't take oil. Let me tell you what happens when you rush this. I split a whole pine top once. Years back, well, more than a few if I'm honest, I cranked the clamps down like I was in a hurry on wood that hadn't sat long enough, and the panel bowed under the pressure and cracked clean across a knot the next dry week. A weekend's work. Firewood. So now I clamp snug, not savage, and I give the glue a full day to cure before I touch it. You already waited a week for the wood. One more day won't hurt you. Once it's cured, Square up the panel, cross-cut both ends clean and even, and ease those sharp top edges with a couple passes of sandpaper, just enough that a forearm rests easy on them. Then sand the face, starting around 80 grit to level the seams, then 120, then 180. Don't chase it finer than that on pine. Burnish the surface shut, and it won't drink the oil. While the top's curing, you build the base 4 legs, 4 aprons, and this is where a table is won or lost because the base takes all the abuse. People lean on a table, they scoot it across the floor. They tip back in their chairs against it. All of that is racking, the sideways push that tries to fold a base flat into a parallelogram. So the joint you use here matters more than any other in the whole piece. Cut your 4 legs from the 4x4. For a standard dining height, cut them a hair over 28 inches. Set your 1.5 inch top on, and you'll land right around 30 inches, which is where a dining table wants to be. Size things, so the top overhangs the base 2 or 3 inches on every side. That's what lets a body pull a chair up and get their knees under without barking a shin on a leg. And hang your aprons down from the underside of the top 3 or 4 inches, deep enough to stiffen the base, shallow enough that a person's thighs still clear them sitting down. Here's how you join the legs and aprons. And I want you to hear me on this, not pocket screws. I know the pocket hole jig is popular, and it has its place: cabinets, face frames, quick work. But a table base takes racking day after day, year after year, and a pocket screw run into end grain will in time work itself loose. You'll feel the wobble inside a year or two, and there's no good way to draw it back tight. So we don't start there. We use a mortise and tenon, the oldest good joint there is, and simpler than the name makes it sound. On the end of each apron you cut a tongue, that's the tenon, a flat tab of wood about 1/3 of the apron's thickness, standing proud. Into the leg you chop a matching slot, that's the mortise, sized so the tongue slides home snug. Wood locking into wood. Glue that and it's solid, but the old plain way, the way that needs no clamps at all, is to draw bore it. You bore a peg hole through the leg and through the tenon sitting inside it, but you set the hole in the tenon a whisker closer to the shoulder, maybe a 1/16 of an inch off. Drive a whittled hardwood peg through, and that little offset pulls the joint tight and holds it there. No clamps, no waiting on glue. Gideon Schrock, a fellow over in Lancaster County who builds trestle tables, drawbores every joint he cuts, and some of his have sat in kitchens 40 years without a wiggle. Build the base in the right order, and it goes easy. Glue up the 2 ends first, a leg, a short apron, a leg, and let those set. Then join the 2 ends together with the long aprons. Before that last glue dries, measure the base corner to corner, both diagonals. When those 2 measurements match, your base is square. Nudge it till they do. That's the joint that pays you back. Cut a mortise and tenon right one time, and it outlasts you money in the bank. Interest you never have to spend, sitting quiet in the corner of your kitchen. I learned this at my father's bench and never found a reason to change it. Now we marry the top to the base, and there's one rule here that saves your table's life, so don't let it slip past. You do not screw the top down tight, and you never glue it down. That solid top is always breathing, swelling a little across its width in a humid summer, shrinking a little in a dry winter, every year it lives. Pin it down solid and it can't move, and wood that can't move doesn't sit there politely. It cracks. A long split right across the grain, usually the first dry winter with the furnace running, so you fasten it so it can float, and there are 3 simple ways any one of them works. Wood buttons, little blocks with a tongue that hooks into a groove cut on the inside of the apron and a screw up into the top. The button slides in its groove as the wood moves. Or steel Z-clips, same idea, set into a saw kerf. Or figure-8 fasteners, little discs that pivot. Whichever you pick, run the screw that goes up into the top through a slot, not a tight hole, so the top can travel that hair it needs. Space them about every foot around the aprons. 5 minutes of work, and it's the difference between a top that lives 100 years and one that splits by March. Set the table on a flat floor and check for a wobble. If one leg rides proud, don't shim it with a folded matchbook for the rest of its life. Trim a whisker off the long legs or sand the high one down until it sits dead steady. A table that rocks will pester you 3 meals a day. Then the finish, and we keep it cheap and simple, same as the rest. Because pine fuzzes, wipe the whole table down with a damp rag first to raise the grain, let it dry, and knock those little whiskers back with your fine sandpaper. Now the oil. Boiled linseed oil is the old standby. A quart runs about $10 and finishes this table twice over, so call it a couple dollars of oil in the piece. Wipe it on thin with a rag, let it soak in a few minutes, then wipe all the excess back off. Thin coats, always a thick coat of oil, just sits gummy and never cures. Then you wait. Give each coat a full day before the next. In a cool or damp shop, closer to 2 or 3 days. Rushing the finish undoes all your care. 2 or 3 coats, and the grain comes alive, and once it's fully cured, you can set a plate down and eat off it with no worry. Want a little more sheen? Rub a coat of paste wax over the cured oil, but that's for looks, not need. Now hear this part plainly, because it's the one that can burn your house down, and I mean that as a plain fact, not a figure of speech. The rags you wipe that oil on can catch fire on their own. Linseed oil cures by giving off heat, and a balled up oily rag in a wastebasket holds that heat in until it smolders and lights no spark, no flame, no warning. So when you're done, carry every oily rag outside and lay it flat, one layer, over the lip of a can or out on the concrete, and let it dry hard in the open air before it ever goes in the trash. Never wad them up. Never leave them in the shop overnight. That's not fuss for its own sake. That's a house people have lost, and it's the easiest fire in the world to never have. So let's total it honest. 5 boards, a 4x4, a couple 2x4s, a bit of glue, a handful of pegs, a little oil, $60 to $90 in a weekend of your time. That's the ledger. Now set that against the store. Several $100s for a table that's particle board under a paper-thin skin stapled together, and the day a leg gets wet or a screw strips, there's no fixing it. It goes to the curb, and inside of 5 years most of them do. You rent that table. You never own it. This one you own outright, and this is where the money in the bank comes home. You spent an honest weekend and less than $100, and in return you get a table that gets handed down, one your daughter refinishes 30 years from now and swears is better than anything the stores could sell her. The joints you cut right today keep paying quiet every year, long after you've forgotten the afternoon you cut them. Cheap furniture charges you again and again. Good joinery you pay for once. That's the whole trade, and it's the best one in the shop. None of this needs a big shop or deep pockets. It needs straight boards, a few sharp tools, one honest joint, and the patience to let the wood settle and the glue cure. That's it. Folks built furniture this way for 1,000 years before there was ever a power cord in the room, and the tables they left behind are the ones we still gather around today. You can build that. Build it once so you never build it twice. Tell me down in the comments what you'd build first. A kitchen table, a workbench, something small for a grandchild. I read them, and I'll steer you right if you get stuck. Build it once. Build it to last 100 years. I'll see you back at the bench.